Tennessee, David Tulis.
I appreciate your giving me just a minute of your time. David Tulis here. We have a vote coming this next week on the monument of Lieutenant General A.P. Stewart in front of the county courthouse. And Andy Burke's perspective, his horizons are suddenly expanding. He's now looking like his eyes scan the horizon far over the horizon, if you will, imagining the peril, the risk, the great toil involved in running for a statewide office, which he has contemplated before. But now he has the prospect of the seat being vacated by Bob Corker. And he would be running, the mayor would be running as a Democrat, of course, a progressive Democrat, who I would like to think that he could have done more to burnish his credentials as a mayor by thinking in terms of police reform. That would have been a very, very important thing to have accomplished before actually leaving that office. And so he can do that in the way of policy, because after all, police are policy, right? The word policy comes from police, and they are the same. If you have a policy of any kind, you are policing that particular area in which the policy it concerns itself. And so he is making steps in that direction, rightly so, and with our hearty approval and applause, and at every point where Mayor Burke is going in the direction of police reform and turning upside down the training rituals, the training proportions in the academy, he is to be commended. But where these reforms are not insisted upon and not viewed as essential for the health, welfare, and peace of the people, then one can say, well, Andy Burke, why are you not caring more for the common people, which is what Democrats claim to do all the time, to care about ordinary working class people, the poor, the welfare recipient, and of course the minority, which that category they would include women. And so we have the prospect of losing Mayor Burke a year after his campaign for re-election. We might be losing the mayor at some point to a great effort to take the seat of Bob Corker. Now, the Senate is the body that originally in the Constitution, in the founding of our constitutional republic, the Senate was the body that represented the state, not the people, but the state. The House of Representatives was that which cared about the people, and it was the common house. Of course, it really doesn't represent common people anymore because there are too few representatives. For it to be a body that really represented the people with humane-sized districts, human and manageable and personably sized districts, you would have a House of Representatives with 3,000 or more people in it. That would make it a real House of Representatives. But now our districts are so gigantic and so many people in them that there's no way, for example, that Chuck Fleischman can represent his district because it's incoherent. It's incoherence because it's too large. And the Senate now, with only 100 members, represents the states to the federal power. And that genuine connection between the state and the federal power was lost when the election of senators was changed to the popular vote, and not anymore, and not any longer to selection by the legislatures. Right? It used to be that the legislatures named the senator to look out for the interests of the states. Now we don't have that anymore, and so states have been effectively bypassed, and the federal lending and granting Leviathan appeals directly to the people. And that process, that loss of the state's control of the Senate, of the federal Senate, has allowed for the states to convert themselves essentially into administrative bodies of the executive branches, and paid for by taxes levied by the Congress and borrowings created ex nihilo by the Congress as well. So these are big stories here in Chattanooga today. And I am David Tulis. I do thank you for giving me just a few minutes of your time here at Nooga Radio 92.7. And now the work that we have to get to touches on something that's in your back pocket. My initial launching of what I think is important to say, the lead, you might say, and that is on Puerto Rico and an unusual story that WDEF.com, our CBS sister, you might say, in the TV industry, is carrying now. And it's about Puerto Rico and the shortage of cash. Now, cash is important, especially when you have a disaster. Whenever you have a disaster from the hand of God, which would be a hurricane, cash is important because centralized systems, ATMs, for example, don't work. You don't have ATMs that run on gasoline-fed generators. It doesn't work like that. They rely on electricity from the grid, which in Puerto Rico is down. And so the disaster in Puerto Rico is that people can't buy anything because they don't have credit cards that work, right? They don't have debit cards that work either. And so as we look at WDEF.com, the story is about this great disaster in the pocketbook, in the purse. One woman mentioned had $4 left, and she's running around trying to find a place for gasoline. There's not much gasoline you can buy, about a gallon and a quarter at our prices here in Chattanooga, with $4. And so cash is a step in the direction of autonomy. And there is a war is in our collapsing centralized system, which is the national economy run by a national government with a debt of $20 trillion in pretended dollars. That is a system which is incoherent and unsustainable, and it will be shown up as a fraud and a mirage by the equities market. The equities market is representing probably in the leading gigantic state sovereign funds such as CalPERS, and even in Tennessee we've got the sovereign wealth fund, which masquerades as a teacher retirement system. Even that one, they will be making their sales first, getting out of the equities, followed by the mob of retail investors who've all gotten their signals too late. Right, they got it by watching Fox News and didn't get out soon enough. And so you're going to have a collapse in that market, which will belie the phony American economic system based on debt. Right, we have a system not based on wealth anymore, but on debt. And the reason the question of cash is important is because when you have a crisis, the people with the cash are the people who are the rich ones, right? Well, now we're talking here about Federal Reserve notes, but green rectangles, as I like to call them, in code, right? If you understand the David Tulis code, you understand that what a green rectangle is. It's a word that won't flag anybody's notice in an email. Okay, you can send an email with that phrase in it, and the good people in their search engines who are spying on your communications won't flag with a low-level flag that piece of correspondence, and because they haven't quite no one up there listens to my show, of course, and I'm glad they haven't noticed me. And so and I'm holding up in my hand some green rectangles on my billfold, some 20s, as I don't have any 50s or 100s on me, but things like this in Puerto Rico are of great value, and we are living in an economy that is flooded with the digital versions of these, and that's the federal debt is part of it, and also indebtedness in the student loan market. These are all digital versions of these pseudo financial instruments. Federal Reserve notes is what they're called. Dollars is the common nomenclature. But the war on cash is I think important to mention, and especially in light of admissions by, for example, the former English head of the central bank, Lord King, Mervyn King, in a story. And I mention this just because these signs are everywhere. They're everywhere, even in the popular press. The financial press, of course, has them pretty often in say the Wall Street Journal. But the signs of the expansion of cash, not real paper cash, but cash in the banking sector. And here we have. Let me just give you a little side glance here into this story. The headline is in the Wall Street Journal: warning signs about the global economy. Former governor of the Bank of England says total debts are troublesome. He says that we could be in for a bumpy decade ahead because the only immutable law of economics, double entry bookkeeping. Well, in other words, banking and fractional reserve banking. If asset values fall, then so too must total liabilities. Unsustainably low interest rates, he says, over a long period have led, of course, he's been involved in this through the EU, has over a long period of have led to a significant imbalance in economies around the world, whether excess capacity in the export sectors of Germany and China or excess investment in residential and commercial property in the U.S. and U.K. In other words, the bubble in Chattanooga is that to which he refers. Rising interest rates will reveal the true state of balance sheets that have been concealed by accounting rules that allow loans to be valued at their full value, provided those loans are currently being serviced. So you have debt that's being serviced at very low interest rates, and they can be serviced because the rates of interest are low. In other words, the money is free, and so you can make your payment on the note, which you can't pay in a real economy where the real interest rate is not suppressed but rises to the marketplace level, which is no doubt several times higher than where that rate is now. We shall see, he says, the force of what economist Joseph Schumpeter described as creative destruction, brings that up as an inevitable part of economic growth in a prosperous capitalist economy, which of course he would claim to be a part of. That force is now needed, he says, to correct the misplaced pattern of investments induced by faulty market signals such as inappropriate exchange rates and excessively low interest rates. Well, it's just a dull way of saying, a way that if you read that, you're not going to have your guard up because of the way it's phrased. But what he's saying is we have artificially suppressed rates of interest, which means that everybody confidently goes into debt and keeps going into debt because with prosperity, we have more debt. More debt lets us do more, which brings us more revenues and more incomes. Let's get more debt to increase the incomes. And though the gains, the margins are smaller and smaller on the profit side, if we just have more debt to create more units, to make more of these units, we have a smaller unit profit per unit produced. But if we get more out there, we'll, more cars, more apartment complexes in Chattanooga and the like, will make our note payments. That's kind of what the scene is. It's a dead end. Okay, we're in an economic dead end in Chattanooga and elsewhere, and we're the victims of it. We are going to be the victims of this recognition of the kind that Mervyn King, the governor of the Bank of England, and now a professor at New York University, and his book, a book out called The End of Alchemy. Well, there are too many people who believe in alchemy, even here. He says, we cannot know whether the process of writing down debt will, as we emerge from the excesses of the financial crisis, undermine the normal forces generating economic growth. Yes, indeed. Governor King. Yes, indeed. Also in the Wall Street, in the same section, which was a special section on cash and it was the future of finance. Should we move to a mostly cashless society? And there was a debate between Kenneth Rogoff on the front, and the man who takes my side is an idiot. His name is James McAndrews. He's an economist and a fellow at the Wharton Financial Institution Center and a former director of research at the Fed. Of course, the Fed hires every economist of any note, and these people all say what they're supposed to. And here you can tell he's on the payroll, or was formerly on the payroll. He still may be getting some kind of stipend from the good people at the central bank. But one way of he's for cash, right? He would applaud my wonderful, amusing Cash Friday, which is the first Friday of every month, where you, my listener, and I, we go to our local credit union or bank, and we draw out $100. And we do that, probably in 20s, like the ones I'm holding up here on YouTube. we are on YouTube, by the way, Nooga Radio, and also on Facebook at Hot News Talk Radio. And on your smartphone, just by the way, on your smartphone, 92.7, just dial in Nooga Radio at the TuneIn Radio app, which is free. These bills, and on Cash Friday, and we do that because if you and I, the system won't notice if you and I do it, but if one more person, that means three of us, you and me, and one more person gets $100 out of the banking system, there will be urgent memos sent among the high officials in the banking system because there's no money in it. Okay, there's no money in that system. It's very, very cash poor. There's no real cash. Cash being, of course, Federal Reserve notes of the kind in desperate shortage at ATMs in Puerto Rico. A woman says, "Of course, I took out money before the hurricane, but it's gone already. We're without gasoline, without money, without food. This is a disaster." No Federal Reserve notes, right? No federal Reserve notes Antonia Garcia, retiree who lives in the city of Bayamon, said she was down to her last $4, and she spent a day using precious gas to look for an ATM, which was in operation because she couldn't get into her credit union, which was taking only 200 customers a day. This has become chaotic, she said. Well, the cashless society, the cashless argument, the no side, the side that I'm on, he has the most idiotic argument at the end, and here it is. Well, you don't have to worry about crime, right? That's what the end the war, end the cash, exist in the existence of cash side says. That would be that argument is made by Kenneth Rogoff, who is a former high official in the federal government. He says, let's get rid of cash entirely, make it all digital. That way we can control private usage, and we can avoid disruptions when we have to go into negative interest rates. Right? Because when people go into negative interest rates, when they do, people who have debt go into cash because there's more. If you have to keep your money locked away at a negative interest rate, you're having to pay the bank to keep the money there. So what you do is you go into paper notes, right? And you prevent that. You prevent that if you have no cash, right? You have no cash to go into, so all your assets, all your dollar-denominated assets, are stuck in the bank. Yeah, you can interrupt me. Go ahead. 800-8949. 800-8949. Now, the man who's making the right argument ends his essay with his ludicrous proposal of just raising inflation. Have more inflation. What that means is that your $100 bill, which is used by gangsters, right, which is used by the mob, and used by day workers who come here from Mexico to get paid in $100 bills and to pay their rent in $100 bills and their car repairs in $100 bills. We can stop all these people. And here he's saying the man who is favoring cash. He said, "Well, just raise the inflation rate. That way, the people who are using cash are using actually smaller bills as time goes on, right? $100 bill becomes an $80 bill, becomes a $70 bill, becomes a $50 bill, and finally a $100 bill with inflation is worth what we would today call a $20 bill, right? So finally, a $20 bill buys a couple of sandwiches and some fries and a couple of Cokes at a restaurant." But in the future, with inflation, right, you end the cash problem by higher inflation. A higher inflation rate also would mean that the real value of $50s and $100 bills, he says, would decline more quickly, meaning criminal activity would be disrupted by the need to transport, store, and exchange many more bills. Right, with inflation, your gangs, your drug cartels are going to have to charge more, so they have to have more satchels for the banknotes. And while a higher inflation rate would accelerate the need for more bills to complete transactions, he says, that would still happen over a much longer time frame than the phase out of large bills envisioned in this discussion, giving people more time to adjust. Well, that's right. Inflation is a slow creeping tax, and if you banish or demonetize $100 bills like India did in November 2016, demonetizing 500 rupee notes and 1,000 rupee notes, a disaster to local economy all around India, affecting hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions of poor people who don't use banks in that country, who favor using bank notes from the Central Bank of India. And we haven't had a currency call in. The Soviet Union had a currency call in, and I remember I had just gotten married, or I was just courting my bride to be, Jeanette, and the currency call in of the Soviet Union, which terrorized and deprived babushkas and these old peasant women, with the hooked noses that you see in photographs, with their huddled in their great coats and their hats and their plastic bags of belongings. All of those women, those retirees and war widows, lost everything in that. And I remember embracing, sitting on the couch with Jeanette and kind of embracing her, but saying, man, I wonder what's happening today in the currency call-in. And she would never let me live that down. She would never let me live that down. How the Soviet currency call-in came between me and an intimate moment with Jeanette. I have not lived that down, though she has not brought it up lately. Probably because I didn't tell her anything about the Indian rupee demonetization scam. I saved myself having to be reminded of my earlier indiscretion in obsessing over these matters. Well, the reason that cash is important is, again, because it's private. It doesn't hold in a temporary kind of way. It's not an obligation of someone to give you, right? If you have it in your pocket, or you have it in a strong box in your apartment or your house, you don't have to rely on some centralized system. And I think local economy is all about ending our reliance on centralized systems, whether they be public school, whether they be on mayor's offices, whether they be on police departments, whether they be on banks and credit unions. Is there some way we can kind of get around these systems? Ending our reliance on taxi cab companies. Well, that's already happening. And ending our reliance on classified ads in the Chattanooga Times-Free Press. That's happening too. That's why that newspaper is a shadow of its former self. This is David Tulis, even though it has done some good journalism. David Tulis.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4.